There is something about the quiet of a morning near the end of the year that feels different from other mornings. The air doesn't rush you. The light arrives without urgency. Even sound seems to pause, as if it knows this is a moment meant for noticing rather than doing. I've found myself sitting in that quiet lately, not trying to organize it, not trying to name it, just letting it settle. And as it does, memories from this year drift up in their own time. Not the dramatic ones people usually talk about, but the small, almost forgettable moments that somehow carried more weight than we realized while they were happening. Over the years, I've noticed how the end of a year doesn't actually ask us to judge what happened. It simply offers space. Space to see what we carried. Space to notice what stayed with us longer than we expected. Space to acknowledge what quietly changed shape inside us without asking for permission. And as this year draws to a close, there's a softness in looking back when no one is asking for conclusions, no one is demanding lessons, no one is keeping score. Some parts of this year probably still feel close to the surface for you. A conversation that lingered longer than it should have. A silence that said more than words ever could. A moment when you realized something had ended not with drama, but with a calm certainty that surprised you. I wonder if you noticed how many of those realizations arrived quietly, without announcements, without explanations. They simply arrived and somehow you understood. There were likely moments this year that didn't look important at the time. Ordinary days, routine mornings, evenings that blended into one another. Yet now, standing here at the edge of the year, those moments seem to glow a little differently, as if time has gently highlighted them and said, this mattered more than you knew. I've often found that what shapes us most rarely demands attention while it's happening. It waits until later when we finally slow down enough to feel it. Lately, I've been thinking about how much of this year required a kind of quiet endurance. Not the dramatic kind that earns recognition, but the private kind that no one sees. The days you showed up when it would have been easier to stay still. The moments you held your tongue not because you were afraid, but because you sensed that silence was kinder. The times you kept going without needing applause. There's a dignity in that kind of living that doesn't announce itself, yet it leaves a mark. You may have noticed that some hopes you carried into this year changed shape along the way. Not necessarily because they failed, but because you did. Time has a way of refining what we're willing to carry forward. What once felt essential now feels optional. What once felt urgent now feels distant. And sometimes what we never planned for becomes the thing we protect most fiercely. I wonder if you felt that shift too subtle but undeniable. There were probably moments this year when you surprised yourself, not with bold moves or grand decisions, but with restraint, with patience, with a steadiness you didn't know you had. Perhaps there was a situation where an older version of you would have reacted quickly, spoken sharply, or tried to fix everything immediately, and instead you waited, you listened, you let things unfold without forcing them. That kind of change doesn't ask for recognition, yet it changes everything. As the year moved along, it may have asked you to let go of certain expectations, not all at once and not dramatically, just little by little. Expectations about how people should show up, expectations about timing, expectations about outcomes. Letting go rarely looks graceful while it's happening. It often feels unfinished, unresolved, slightly uncomfortable. Yet when you look back now, there may be a sense that something heavy loosened its grip without you needing to name it. I've noticed that the end of a year often brings up a strange mixture of gratitude and fatigue. Gratitude for what held, fatigue from what required more energy than expected. Both can exist together without canceling each other out. You don't have to choose one feeling over the other. They can sit side by side, quietly acknowledging one another. There's a kind of honesty in allowing that. Somewhere along this year, you may have realized that certain things no longer needed your constant attention. Worries that once occupied so much mental space now feel less persuasive. Not gone, perhaps, but quieter, less convincing. It's interesting how time can soften even the loudest concerns when we stop feeding them with urgency. I wonder if you notice which worries lost their grip without a fight. There may also be parts of this year you haven't fully sorted yet. experiences that don't fit neatly into understanding, feelings that remain unnamed. And that's all right. Closure isn't a requirement for moving forward. Some things simply settle into us without explanation. They become part of how we see, how we listen, how we choose our words. Not everything needs to be resolved before the calendar turns. As mornings arrive now, closer to the end than the beginning, there's a different quality to breathing. Slower, deeper. As if the body knows it has carried a lot and is finally being allowed to set some of it down. I've found that mornings like this don't ask for ambition, they ask for presence. Not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that listens before speaking, notices before acting. Looking back over this year, there may be a gentle recognition that you did more than you realize. Not in accomplishments, but in endurance, in discernment, in choosing what deserved your energy and what no longer did. Those choices often happened quietly, internally, without witnesses. Yet they shaped the way you arrived here at this moment with a steadiness that didn't exist a year ago. There's also the matter of what didn't happen this year, the plans that remain plans, the conversations that never took place, the paths that stayed unexplored. It's easy to view those as absences, but sometimes they are forms of protection we only understand later. I've learned that not every unopened door is a loss. Some are simply acknowledgments that timing has its own intelligence. As the year slowly loosens its hold, attention naturally begins to drift toward what comes next. Not with urgency, not with promises, just with curiosity. The coming year doesn't need to be shaped yet. It doesn't need resolutions or declarations. It can remain undefined for a while. There's something respectful about letting the future arrive in its own time rather than demanding clarity too soon. You may have noticed that what you want from mornings now feels different than it once did. Less noise, less pressure, more space, more honesty. A chance to arrive fully before the day begins asking for anything. That shift didn't happen overnight. It was earned quietly through lived experience, through noticing what drains and what steadies. As this year prepares to step aside, there's no need to summarize it, no need to assign meaning. It has already done its work. What it offered has been received, even if not consciously. What it needed to take has already been released, even if gradually. You're standing here not because everything was resolved, but because you learned how to carry uncertainty without being consumed by it. In these final days, mornings can simply be what they are: a gentle pause, a breath before movement, a reminder that time continues, but it doesn't rush you unless you ask it to. There is something grounding in realizing that nothing is being demanded from you in this moment. Just awareness, just presence, just the quiet acknowledgement that you are here, and that is enough for now. As the days edge closer to the end of the year, there's often a subtle change in how time feels. Hours don't seem to push forward as insistently. They stretch a little, creating room to notice what usually slips past. I've found that in this slower rhythm, memories don't arrive in order. They come in fragments. A smell, a tone of voice, a glance exchanged across a room. Things that didn't ask to be remembered yet stayed. This year may have asked you to learn a different relationship with patience. Not the kind that waits while counting minutes, but the kind that settles into uncertainty without needing reassurance. There were moments when answers didn't come, timelines blurred, and clarity remained just out of reach. And still, life continued. You continued. I wonder if you notice how capable you were of moving forward without having everything explained. There's often a point in a year when effort begins to look different. Early on, effort feels like pushing, proving, striving. Later, it becomes quieter, more selective. You may have felt yourself conserving energy in ways you never used to. Saying no without explanation, stepping back without guilt, choosing rest without justifying it. These aren't signs of withdrawal. They're signs of discernment earned slowly through experience. Looking back, you might see that some relationships shifted this year, not dramatically, not with confrontation, but through distance, silence, or gentle realignment. Sometimes closeness fades not because of conflict, but because two people are simply no longer walking the same rhythm. That kind of change can feel tender even when it's necessary. I wonder if you sensed when it was time to stop holding something together with effort alone. There were likely moments this year when you felt deeply without showing it, when emotions stayed beneath the surface, not suppressed, just held privately. There's a quiet strength in that, not because feelings are hidden, but because they're honored internally rather than displayed for understanding. Over time, you may have learned that not everything needs to be shared in order to be real. As mornings arrive now, there's a softness to starting the day without urgency. No need to immediately reach for plans or expectations, just noticing the body waking up, the breath finding its pace, the sense of being here before the world asks anything of you. These moments don't demand gratitude or intention, they simply offer presence. And sometimes that's more than enough. This year may also have changed how you listen, not just to others, but to yourself. Perhaps you became more attuned to subtle signals, fatigue before burnout, hesitation before regret, calm before certainty. Listening like that isn't something we're taught, it's something we learn by paying attention long enough to notice patterns. I wonder if you recognize that shift when it happened. There's something about the end of a year that brings honesty to the surface. Not the confessional kind, but a quieter truthfulness, the kind that acknowledges what worked and what didn't without judgment. You don't need to be harsh with yourself about choices that made sense at the time. Perspective changes things. What felt right then may feel different now, and that doesn't invalidate the person you were when you chose it. You may have noticed that certain worries you carried into this year didn't make it all the way through. Not because they were solved, but because they lost their authority over your attention. Time has a way of revealing which concerns deserve space and which ones simply repeat themselves without offering anything new. Letting go of repetitive worry is often less about courage and more about quiet fatigue with carrying what no longer serves. As the calendar nears its end, it's natural to think about what remains unfinished. Yet unfinished doesn't mean incomplete. Some things are meant to stay open, evolving slowly beyond the boundaries of a single year. There's a difference you may have noticed between what feels unresolved and what simply needs more time. Not everything belongs to this moment. This year may have also softened your relationship with certainty. You may no longer need to be sure before you move, comfortable before you decide, prepared before you begin. There's a confidence that grows when you realize you can adjust as you go, respond as needed, and trust your ability to navigate what appears. That confidence doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly and stays. In the mornings now, thoughts about the coming year may drift in and out without demanding action. Images rather than plans, sensations rather than strategies, a sense of direction without a map. There's no requirement to shape those thoughts yet. They can remain impressions gently forming in the background while you stay rooted in where you are. Looking back, you might see that you spent much of this year learning when to engage and when to step back, when to speak, and when to let silence do the work. Those choices often happened instinctively without explanation. Yet they protected something important, your energy, your clarity, your sense of inner steadiness. That kind of wisdom rarely feels dramatic while it's developing. There were probably days this year when you felt a quiet satisfaction without knowing why. Nothing extraordinary had happened, nothing had changed externally, and still there was a sense of being aligned, of not fighting against the moment. Those days are easy to overlook, yet they often signal a deeper sense of peace than excitement ever could. As the year prepares to close, it doesn't require evaluation. It doesn't ask to be labeled as good or bad, successful or disappointing. It has already spoken in the ways it needed to. What remains is simply what you carry forward, not as a list, not as goals, but as a way of being that feels more honest than it did before. The mornings ahead, still quiet, still gentle, don't ask for declarations. They invite awareness, a willingness to arrive as you are without rehearsing who you should be next. There's something grounding in allowing that, something steadying in realizing that you don't need to reinvent yourself to enter a new year. For now, it's enough to notice where you are standing, to feel the year loosening behind you without pushing it away, to sense the next one approaching without reaching for it. This in-between space doesn't need to be filled. It can remain open, spacious, and calm. And as this morning continues, there's no need to move quickly, no need to decide anything yet. Just the quiet recognition that you've arrived here with more awareness than you had before. And that awareness, earned slowly over time, will naturally carry itself forward. As this stretch of days continues, there's often a gentle pulling inward, not withdrawal, just a natural turning toward what feels steady. I've noticed how near the end of a year, attention shifts away from what impresses and toward what endures. Loud moments lose their shine. What remains are the things that quietly stayed when everything else changed. This year may have taught you something about limits, not as restrictions, but as forms of care, knowing when enough was enough, when one more effort would cost more than it gave, learning that boundaries don't have to be defended loudly to be real. Sometimes they're simply lived consistently until they become understood. There were likely moments when you chose yourself without making it a statement. You didn't explain, you didn't justify, you simply acted in alignment with what felt true. Those moments don't always feel courageous while they're happening. Often they feel ordinary, yet they accumulate, slowly reshaping how life feels from the inside. As mornings arrive now, you may notice that the body remembers before the mind does. A sense of ease or tension upon waking, a readiness or a hesitation. These sensations carry information quietly reflecting what the year has etched beneath conscious thought. Listening to them doesn't require interpretation, just acknowledgement. This year may have also changed how you relate to effort. There's a difference between effort that drains and effort that sustains. Perhaps you became more selective about where your energy went, more willing to let certain things remain undone, more aware that constant striving isn't the same as meaningful movement. I wonder if you noticed how relief followed some of those choices. There were probably moments when you realized you didn't need to respond immediately. Not to messages, not to expectations, not to emotional pulls. Time itself became an ally rather than an obstacle. Allowing space often clarified what urgency had obscured. Silence did some of the work you once tried to do yourself. As the year unfolded, you may have felt a growing comfort with not being fully understood, a quiet acceptance that misunderstanding doesn't always require correction. Sometimes it's enough to know your own intention. That shift can feel subtle, yet it frees a surprising amount of energy that once went into explaining, defending, or proving. In these final mornings of the year, there's an invitation to notice what feels settled, not perfect, not complete, just settled enough to rest upon. Perhaps there's a relationship that found its natural place, a routine that quietly supports you, a way of thinking that no longer argues with itself as much. These aren't dramatic milestones, yet they shape daily life in profound ways. Looking back, you might see how often you trusted something intangible this year, a sense, a pause, an inner knowing that didn't come with evidence. Trusting that kind of guidance doesn't always feel confident. Sometimes it feels like gentle surrender to what feels right without demanding certainty. And still, it carried you. There may have been moments when grief brushed against this year. Not always tied to loss, but to change, to acknowledging that certain versions of life are no longer possible. Grief like that doesn't need resolution. It simply asks to be felt without being rushed away. Over time, it often softens into acceptance without needing words. As attention turns almost imperceptibly toward the year ahead, it doesn't need to be shaped yet. The coming months can remain undefined, spacious. There's no requirement to decide who you will be or what you will accomplish. The steadiness you carry now didn't come from planning. It came from living. In the mornings, light continues to arrive regardless of the calendar. It doesn't hurry. It doesn't announce change. It simply shows up consistent and quiet. There's something reassuring in that constancy, a reminder that time moves forward, whether or not we've prepared a narrative for it. This year may have also deepened your relationship with trust. Not the kind that relies on outcomes, but the kind that rests in the sense of being held by something larger than immediate circumstances. Not defined, not named, just present in the way things continue to unfold, even when control loosens its grip. You may have noticed that certain fears lost their sharpness this year. Not eliminated, just softened. They still appear, but they no longer dictate direction. Experience has a way of tempering fear, showing it what you've already survived. That understanding doesn't need to be spoken to be effective. As the year nears its close, there's a sense of completion that doesn't require celebration, just acknowledgement, a quiet nod to what was carried, what was released, and what remains. There's no need to tie it together neatly. Life rarely arranges itself that way. For now, the morning can remain simple: breath, light, awareness. No pressure to move forward faster than you are. No expectation to define what comes next. Just the understanding that you're here at this moment with a deeper steadiness than before. As the year reaches this quieter edge, there's often a sense that movement has slowed, even if life itself hasn't. The pace inside feels different, less reactive, more observant. I've noticed how in moments like these, the mind stops racing ahead and instead rests on what's already known through experience rather than thought. This year may have taught you how to stay with things longer, not situations but feelings, allowing them to exist without immediately trying to change them. There's a maturity in that kind of staying, a recognition that not every discomfort needs intervention and not every emotion needs resolution. Some simply need space. You may have found yourself less interested in explaining your inner world this year, less inclined to translate what you feel into something digestible for others. There's a quiet relief in realizing that understanding doesn't always need to be shared to be valid. Some things deepen precisely because they're kept close. As mornings arrive now, there's often a natural inclination to listen before engaging, to sense the tone of the day before stepping into it. That kind of listening isn't passive, it's attentive. It allows you to respond rather than react. I wonder if you noticed how much calmer decisions felt when they came from that place. This year may also have altered how you view effort in relationships, knowing when to lean in and when to loosen your hold, understanding that connection can breathe more easily without constant maintenance. There's a subtle trust that grows when you stop forcing alignment and allow relationships to find their own rhythm. There were likely moments when solitude felt different than it once did. Not empty, not heavy, just spacious, perhaps even comforting. Solitude like that doesn't come from isolation. It comes from familiarity with oneself, from knowing you can sit quietly without needing distraction or validation. Looking back, you might notice how your tolerance for noise changed, not just sound, but emotional noise, drama, excess explanation, unnecessary urgency. This year may have sharpened your sensitivity to what feels intrusive versus what feels nourishing. That discernment isn't rigid. It's gentle yet firm. As the end of the year approaches, it's natural to sense a kind of internal clearing, not dramatic release, just subtle rearrangement. Priorities settling into place without debate. Values revealing themselves through repeated choices rather than declarations. I've found that this kind of clarity doesn't arrive through thinking. It emerges through living. You may have noticed that certain ambitions softened this year, not disappeared, but became less insistent, perhaps replaced by a desire for steadiness rather than expansion, depth rather than breadth. That shift doesn't signal a loss of drive. It often signals a deeper understanding of what truly satisfies. In these mornings, time feels less like something to manage and more like something to inhabit. There's no rush to fill it, no pressure to optimize it, just the quiet experience of being present as moments unfold. That presence isn't something you create, it's something you allow. This year may also have refined how you trust yourself, not through confidence, but through familiarity, knowing how you respond under pressure, knowing when to wait, knowing when something feels off, even if you can't explain why. That kind of trust grows slowly through observation rather than assertion. There may have been instances when you chose not to pursue closure, not because it wasn't available, but because you sensed it wasn't necessary. Some things don't need to be fully understood to lose their hold. Letting them remain incomplete can be a form of wisdom rather than avoidance. As attention drifts gently toward the coming year, there's no urgency to prepare. The future doesn't require readiness in this moment. It will meet you as you are, just as this year did. and you've already learned that you can adapt without forcing yourself into certainty. The light of these mornings continues to arrive quietly, illuminating without commentary. It doesn't judge what the year has been. It doesn't forecast what the next will bring. It simply reveals what's present right now. That simplicity carries a kind of reassurance. Looking back, you might see how much of this year was about learning to trust the unfolding rather than trying to control it, allowing life to move without constant adjustment. Accepting that not everything requires your intervention, that realization often arrives softly without fanfare. For now, there's no need to gather conclusions, no need to summarize lessons. The year has already done its work in ways that don't need to be articulated. What matters is what remains with you as you stand here in this moment of quiet transition. And as this morning continues, it's enough to stay where you are, breathing, noticing, letting the year rest behind you without pushing it away, letting what comes next remain unshaped for a little while longer. As these final days continue to unfold, there's often a subtle awareness that something is completing itself. Not with ceremony, not with final words, just with a quiet easing. The kind that happens when effort relaxes its grip and allows things to settle where they naturally belong. I've noticed how at this point in a year, the need to make sense of everything begins to fade. This year may have shown you that understanding isn't always immediate. Some experiences only reveal their meaning after enough time has passed for emotion to soften. When the intensity recedes, perspective has room to breathe. I wonder if you noticed how certain events that once felt overwhelming now feel more distant. Not because they mattered less, but because you no longer live inside them. There were likely moments when you felt yourself choosing calm over intensity. Not because calm was easier, but because intensity no longer felt necessary. That choice doesn't announce itself. It often looks like restraint, like leaving something unsaid, like stepping away from situations that feed urgency rather than clarity. Over time, those choices quietly reshape daily life. As mornings arrive now, there's often a gentler relationship with thought, less mental rehearsing, fewer imagined conversations. The mind rests more easily in the present, no longer needing to revisit everything that happened or anticipate everything that might. That shift doesn't come from discipline. It comes from trust built slowly through lived experience. This year may have refined your sense of what deserves attention. Not everything that asks for it receives it anymore. You may have become more comfortable letting some things pass without engagement. That discernment isn't indifference. It's care for what truly matters. And it frees space for a deeper kind of focus. Looking back, you might see that much of this year involved quiet recalibration, adjusting expectations, revising assumptions, letting go of narratives that no longer fit. None of that required dramatic decisions. It happened gradually through repeated moments of noticing what felt aligned and what didn't. There may have been times when you felt an unexpected sense of peace in situations that once would have unsettled you. Not because circumstances improved, but because your relationship to them changed. That kind of peace doesn't erase difficulty. It simply changes how much power difficulty holds. As the year draws closer to its end, the idea of a new beginning doesn't need to be emphasized. Transitions don't always require contrast. Sometimes they're gentle continuations, carrying forward what has already been established. The coming year doesn't need to be framed as different to be meaningful. You may have noticed that your inner voice sounds different now, quieter, less urgent, more patient. It speaks without insisting. It allows space for uncertainty without filling it prematurely. That voice wasn't created intentionally. It emerged through time, through experience, through learning when to listen rather than react. In these mornings, there's often a sense of being grounded in the body, feet on the floor, breath steady, a simple awareness of being here. That physical presence anchors the mind without effort. It reminds you that you don't need to be anywhere else to be complete in this moment. This year may have also altered how you experience waiting. Waiting no longer feels like a pause between meaningful moments. It feels like a part of life itself, full in its own way, not empty. That shift changes everything about how time is perceived. As attention naturally drifts toward what lies ahead, there's no requirement to define it. The future doesn't need clarity right now. It only needs openness. And openness doesn't demand preparation. It allows what comes to meet you where you are. Looking back, you might see that you trusted yourself more than you realized, not by making bold declarations, but by honoring small signals, by adjusting course when something felt off, by staying when something felt right. Those choices often happen quietly, yet they guided you here. For now, there's nothing to resolve, nothing to finalize. The year can remain what it was, complex, layered, unfinished. It doesn't ask to be improved upon. It simply steps aside, having done its work. And as this morning continues to unfold, it's enough to remain present with what is. No urgency, no anticipation, just the steady awareness of being here at the threshold of something new without needing to name it yet. There's a particular quality to time right now that doesn't ask for participation. It doesn't demand reflection or projection. It simply exists, and in doing so, it invites a different kind of attention. Not focused, not analytical, just aware. I've found that when attention softens like this, the year behind us feels less like a sequence of events and more like a landscape we've quietly walked through. Some parts of that landscape were familiar, paths you've walked before, patterns you recognize quickly. Others were unexpected, asking you to move more slowly, to feel your way forward rather than rely on what had worked in the past. Neither was better or worse. Both shaped how you arrived here, carrying a steadiness that didn't come from certainty but from adaptation. This year may have changed how you relate to effort in subtle ways. You may have noticed when effort turned into strain and when it remained supportive. That distinction becomes clearer with time. Strain asks for more than it gives. Supportive effort feels aligned, even when it requires energy. Learning to tell the difference is something that happens quietly through repeated experience rather than instruction. As mornings continue to arrive with this softer light, there's often less need to fill them. Silence doesn't feel empty. It feels complete on its own. Thoughts can come and go without being followed. Memories can surface without being examined. There's a freedom in allowing that flow without trying to direct it. Looking back, you might see that this year asked you to trust yourself in ways that weren't dramatic. Small decisions, minor adjustments, gentle refusals. Those choices didn't change everything overnight, yet they gradually altered how life feels day to day. That kind of change rarely announces itself. It's noticed later when the absence of friction becomes apparent. There may have been moments when you felt a quiet relief without knowing exactly why. Nothing had been resolved, nothing had been fixed, and still something eased. I've learned that relief doesn't always come from solutions. Sometimes it comes from acceptance, from no longer resisting what is. This year may also have refined how you carry disappointment, not by hardening, but by softening expectations, by understanding that not every outcome reflects effort or worth, that some things unfold according to rhythms beyond personal control. Holding disappointment with less self-blame is a kind of wisdom that develops slowly through lived moment rather than deliberate practice. As attention drifts occasionally toward the coming year, it may do so without urgency, just brief glances. A sense of openness rather than anticipation. That's enough for now. The future doesn't need to be shaped in this quiet space. It will arrive with its own clarity when the time comes. In these days, there's often a heightened sensitivity to what feels grounding. Simple routines, familiar sounds, the way light moves across a room in the morning. These small anchors offer steadiness without requiring interpretation. They remind you that presence doesn't have to be cultivated. It's already here. You may have noticed that your relationship with time itself shifted this year. Less pressure to keep up, more permission to pause. Not as an act of resistance, but as a natural response to what you've learned. Time, when allowed to be experienced rather than managed, feels different, more spacious, less demanding. Looking back, you might see that you didn't need to be pushed forward. You moved when it made sense to move. You rested when rest was needed. That rhythm didn't come from a plan. It emerged from paying attention, from trusting what felt sustainable rather than impressive. There's often a moment somewhere near the end of a year when the need to hold everything together eases, not because everything is resolved, but because you realize it doesn't all need to be. The body seems to understand this before the mind does. Shoulders drop without instruction, breathing deepens on its own, a sense of permission arrives quietly. This year may have taught you that not every feeling asks to be acted on. Some simply want to pass through, to be noticed and released without becoming a story. Allowing that kind of movement takes trust. Trust that you won't lose yourself if you don't grasp tightly. Trust that what matters will stay even if you loosen your hold. As mornings continue to unfold with this softer quality, there's less urgency to define yourself by what you plan to do next. Identity feels less like a project and more like a presence, something you inhabit rather than construct. That shift doesn't require effort. It happens naturally when enough time has passed for striving to lose its appeal. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to choose between reaction and response. Reaction came quickly, familiar, and loud. Response arrived more slowly, quieter, but steadier. Choosing response doesn't always feel satisfying in the moment, yet over time it creates a different kind of ease, fewer regrets, less internal noise. There may have been moments when you noticed yourself pausing before speaking, not out of hesitation, but out of clarity, knowing that words carry weight and silence can too. That awareness changes conversations in subtle ways. It leaves more room for understanding even when nothing is explained. This year may also have softened how you relate to control, not surrendering responsibility, but recognizing the limits of influence, understanding where effort makes a difference and where it only creates tension. Letting go of unnecessary control often brings relief, even when circumstances remain the same. As the end of the year draws nearer, it's natural for certain memories to resurface. Not the ones that demand attention, but the ones that arrive gently. A walk taken without destination, a quiet exchange, a moment of clarity that didn't last long yet lingered. These memories don't ask to be analyzed. They simply remind you of how life feels when it's not being managed. You may have noticed that gratitude this year became quieter too. Less about naming blessings, more about noticing what didn't need to be fixed, what didn't require explanation, what simply worked. That kind of gratitude doesn't announce itself. It settles in the background, steady and unobtrusive. In these mornings, there's often a sense of being exactly where you need to be, even if you don't know what comes next. That feeling doesn't rely on certainty. It rests on familiarity with yourself, with how you move through uncertainty without being undone by it. Looking back, you might recognize how much you learned about pacing, when to slow down, when to wait, when to move forward without forcing momentum. That pacing wasn't taught. It emerged through experience, through noticing what sustained you and what depleted you. This year may have also changed how you think about beginnings. They no longer need to be marked or declared. They happen quietly, often unnoticed, through subtle shifts in attention and intention. Endings, too, can be gentle. Not everything closes with finality. Some things simply fade into a different form. As attention drifts toward the coming year, it may do so without pressure. No checklist, no declarations, just a quiet openness. That openness doesn't need to be filled yet. It can remain spacious, allowing what comes to meet you when it's ready. As the year continues to loosen its hold, there's often a subtle recalibration that happens without effort. Attention shifts away from what demands reaction and toward what feels quietly reliable. I've noticed how in this space, the mind doesn't need to revisit everything that happened. It trusts that what mattered has already found its place. This year may have changed how you relate to momentum. There were times when movement felt necessary and times when stillness carried more wisdom. Learning to recognize the difference isn't something that comes from planning. It comes from paying attention long enough to feel when pushing no longer serves. I wonder if you noticed how relief followed those moments of choosing stillness. As mornings arrive now, there's a gentler awareness of rhythm, not schedules, not obligations, just the natural pace at which the day opens. Light appears, sound returns slowly, thoughts follow when they're ready. There's no need to hurry that sequence. It knows how to unfold on its own. Looking back, you might see that this year asked you to trust pauses, not as delays, but as parts of the process. Pauses often carry information we miss when moving too quickly. They allow feelings to settle, perspectives to widen, and decisions to arrive without force. Trusting a pause can feel counterintuitive, yet it often leads to greater clarity. There were likely moments when you felt a quiet sense of alignment without being able to explain it. Things weren't perfect, questions remained, and still something felt right enough to rest in. That feeling doesn't come from answers. It comes from coherence when actions, values, and energy are no longer pulling in different directions. This year may also have softened your relationship with expectation, not eliminating it but loosening its grip. Expectations no longer dictate satisfaction as strongly as they once did. You may have found contentment in moments that didn't match any plan simply because they felt real. That shift changes how life is experienced moment by moment. As the end of the year approaches, memories may surface with less emotional charge. Not because they've lost significance, but because you're no longer inside them. Distance brings perspective without erasing meaning. It allows appreciation to exist without intensity. You may have noticed that certain habits fell away naturally this year, not through discipline, but through disinterest. They simply no longer fit. That kind of change is often more lasting than anything forced. It happens when growth makes old patterns unnecessary rather than forbidden. In these mornings, there's often a quiet sense of continuity. Life doesn't reset just because a year ends. It flows forward, carrying what's essential and leaving the rest behind without ceremony. That continuity can feel reassuring. It reminds you that you don't need to start over to move forward. Looking back, you might recognize how often you chose what felt true rather than what looked right. Those choices don't always bring immediate clarity. Sometimes they bring simplicity, less internal conflict, less explanation required. That simplicity has its own kind of richness. This year may have also refined how you experience hope, not as anticipation for specific outcomes, but as a general openness to what unfolds. Hope like that isn't fragile. It doesn't rise and fall with circumstances. It rests quietly in the belief that whatever comes can be met. As attention occasionally turns toward the coming year, it does so lightly. There's no urgency to prepare. The steadiness you carry now wasn't built through preparation. It was built through living, through responding, through adjusting when needed, and resting when possible. As this quiet stretch continues, there's often a feeling that the year is no longer asking anything of you. It has already offered what it could. What remains now is simply the experience of standing here, noticing what stayed and what gently fell away without needing to be pushed. This year may have taught you something about simplicity. Not the kind that strips life down, but the kind that allows complexity to exist without being overwhelming. You may have noticed how fewer explanations were needed, how less commentary created more space. That kind of simplicity doesn't come from minimizing life. It comes from becoming more at ease within it. As mornings arrive now, there's a different relationship with intention. The day doesn't need to be shaped before it begins. It can reveal itself gradually. There's something calming in allowing that, in trusting that you'll know what's needed when it appears rather than trying to anticipate it too soon. Looking back, you might see how much of this year involved learning to let moments be what they were. Not better, not worse. Just what they were. That acceptance didn't make everything easy, but it softened the edges. It reduced the internal resistance that often made things heavier than necessary. There may have been times when you realized you no longer needed to explain your choices even to yourself. The internal debates quieted. Decisions felt simpler, not because they were obvious, but because they were aligned. Alignment has a way of reducing noise without effort. This year may also have shifted how you experience connection. Less about constant contact, more about quality. Less about reassurance, more about mutual presence. You may have felt closer to some people through fewer words rather than more. That kind of connection doesn't depend on frequency. It rests on recognition. As the year draws closer to its end, there's often an easing of comparison. Less measuring, less checking, less wondering if you're where you should be. The question itself loses urgency. You're here. That's enough information for now. You may have noticed that your inner world feels less crowded than it once did. Not empty, just orderly in a way that doesn't require maintenance. Thoughts come and go without stacking up. Feelings pass through without lingering unnecessarily. That internal spaciousness didn't arrive suddenly. It grew slowly through repeated moments of letting things be. In these mornings, there's often a heightened awareness of small comforts, warmth, familiar textures, the steadiness of routine. These things don't demand attention, yet they offer grounding. They remind you that stability isn't always dramatic. It's often quiet and consistent. Looking back, you might see how often you chose presence over distraction this year. Not always intentionally, but instinctively. You notice when distraction no longer served as relief, when it only delayed what needed to be felt. Turning toward presence instead wasn't always comfortable, but it proved sustaining. This year may have also refined how you hold uncertainty, not by eliminating it, but by learning to coexist with it. Uncertainty no longer feels like an interruption. It feels like a condition of life that doesn't need to be fixed before moving forward. As attention gently touches the idea of the coming year, it does so without pressure. No expectations are required. No plans are demanded. The future can remain open, receptive, undefined. There's trust in that openness now, born from experience rather than optimism. As these moments keep unfolding, there's often a sense that effort has given way to attentiveness. Not a pulling back, just a gentler way of being with what's here. I've noticed how near the end of a year, awareness becomes more spacious, less interested in labeling experience, and more willing to let it pass through unmarked. This year may have shown you that strength doesn't always feel like steadiness. Sometimes it feels like flexibility, the ability to adjust without losing yourself, to bend without breaking. You may have discovered that resilience doesn't announce itself with certainty. It shows up quietly in your capacity to keep moving, even when the path isn't clearly defined. As mornings arrive now, there's less impulse to reach outward immediately. The day doesn't feel like something to conquer. It feels like something to enter. That shift changes how the body responds to time. Less tension, more receptivity. Breathing settles into its own rhythm without needing guidance. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to trust small signals, a sense of ease, a feeling of resistance, a quiet knowing that didn't come with explanation. Responding to those signals wasn't always easy, yet over time they guided you toward choices that felt more sustainable, more honest. There may have been moments when you noticed how little some things mattered compared to what once felt urgent. Arguments that didn't need to be won. Outcomes that didn't define your worth. Letting those go didn't require resolution. It happened when their hold simply loosened. This year may also have altered how you experience quiet. Silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like a presence of its own, a space where nothing needs to be added. That kind of quiet allows clarity to surface without effort, often revealing what's been known all along. As the year nears, its closed memories may continue to surface without demanding interpretation. They arrive, linger briefly, and pass. There's no need to organize them into meaning. They've already done their work shaping how you understand yourself without asking for recognition. You may have noticed that certain emotional patterns softened this year. Not eliminated, just less insistent. Feelings still arise, but they don't linger as long. Experience has taught them they don't need to stay to be heard. That shift brings a subtle sense of ease that's hard to name, but easy to feel. In these mornings, there's often an appreciation for continuity, the fact that life doesn't reset at the end of a year. It simply continues carrying forward what's essential. That continuity can feel grounding, reminding you that you're not starting from nothing, you're arriving with something already formed. Looking back, you might recognize how much this year was about refinement rather than change, clarifying what matters, letting go of what doesn't, adjusting without reinventing. That kind of growth doesn't draw attention. It settles quietly and stays. As thoughts about the coming year drift in, they don't need to settle yet. They can remain light tentative. There's no requirement to decide what you'll carry forward or leave behind. That discernment will emerge naturally, as it always has. For now, the moment continues without urgency. Breath, light, awareness. Nothing more is needed. The year can continue to ease away at its own pace, and you can remain right here, attentive and steady, without needing to move ahead of yourself. As this quiet unfolding continues, there's often a sense that the year is gently releasing its grip rather than being pushed away. It doesn't leave abruptly. It loosens bit by bit, allowing what belongs to remain and what doesn't to slip out of view without resistance. I've noticed how that kind of ending feels kinder, less demanding, more truthful. This year may have shown you that clarity doesn't always arrive as understanding. Sometimes it arrives as peace, a sense that you no longer need to revisit something even if you can't fully explain it. That peace isn't forgetfulness, it's integration. What needed to be learned has already found its place. As mornings arrive now, there's often a deeper appreciation for the ordinary ways the day begins, the quiet before movement, the first sounds of life returning. These moments don't ask to be improved or used. They simply exist, offering a steady presence that grounds you before anything else unfolds. Looking back, you might see how often you allowed yourself to change your mind this year, not out of indecision, but out of responsiveness. New information, new feelings, new perspectives. Changing your mind wasn't a failure of commitment. It was a sign of attentiveness to what was actually happening rather than what was expected. There may have been moments when you recognized that you no longer needed certain narratives to explain your life, stories about why things happened or where they were supposed to lead. Letting go of those narratives didn't leave emptiness, it created space. Space to experience life as it is rather than as it should be. This year may also have softened your relationship with time passing, less urgency to capture it, less anxiety about losing it. Time became something you lived inside rather than measured against. That shift doesn't happen through effort. It happens when experience teaches you that presence matters more than pace. As the end of the year approaches, it's natural for attention to rest more easily in the present. The future doesn't press as hard. The past doesn't pull as strongly. There's a balance here that doesn't require maintenance. It simply emerges when striving quiets. You may have noticed that certain emotions felt less personal this year. Not distant, just less defining. They came and went without shaping your sense of self as much as they once did. That doesn't mean you felt less deeply. It means you felt with more spaciousness. In these mornings, there's often a gentle recognition that you don't need to prepare for what comes next. You've already learned how to meet things as they arrive. That knowledge doesn't sit in the mind. It lives in the body in the way you pause, breathe, and respond. Looking back, you might see how often you chose not to react this year, not because you were disengaged, but because you recognized when reaction would only add noise. Choosing restraint isn't about suppression. It's about discernment, knowing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. This year may have also refined how you experience hope, not as a promise of specific outcomes, but as a quiet confidence in your ability to navigate whatever unfolds. Hope like that doesn't fluctuate with circumstances. It rests steadily, shaped by experience rather than expectation. As attention occasionally brushes against the coming year, it does so gently. No pressure to define it, no requirement to envision it. The future can remain open, receptive, unformed. There's comfort in knowing you don't need to meet it before it arrives. As this quiet space keeps opening, there's often a sense that nothing more needs to be added. The year has already spoken in its own language, through repetition rather than declaration, through what returned again and again, through what quietly disappeared without needing explanation. I've noticed how at this point attention naturally turns toward what remains steady beneath it all. This year may have shown you how much you can trust yourself without needing reassurance. Not the loud confidence that demands certainty, but a quieter assurance that you'll recognize what matters when it appears. That kind of trust doesn't rush decisions. It allows them to arrive when they're ready. As mornings arrive now, there's often less interest in mental preparation. The day doesn't need to be anticipated to be met well. There's a comfort in letting it come toward you rather than reaching for it. That comfort didn't exist before experience made it possible. Looking back, you might see how often you learned through repetition rather than insight, the same feeling returning until it softened, the same situation appearing until it no longer carried the same weight. Learning like that isn't dramatic, it's cumulative. It settles quietly and stays. There may have been moments when you realized that effort wasn't the missing piece. Attention was. Simply noticing what was already happening changed how it felt. That shift doesn't require control. It asks for presence, and presence doesn't need to be forced. This year may also have changed how you experience letting go, not as loss, but as release. Some things didn't need to be carried into the next season. Setting them down didn't require explanation or closure. It happened naturally when holding on no longer felt necessary. As the end of the year draws closer, there's often a gentle honesty that emerges. Not self-criticism, not evaluation, just a clear sense of what feels true now. That honesty doesn't demand action. It simply informs how you move. You may have noticed that certain questions stopped asking for answers. They didn't disappear, they just stopped pressing. That easing doesn't mean the questions were unimportant. It means they've been absorbed into a broader understanding that doesn't need articulation. In these mornings, there's a subtle steadiness in knowing you don't need to arrive anywhere else. This moment isn't a waiting room. It's a place you can inhabit fully without using it to prepare for something beyond it. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year was about alignment rather than achievement, feeling at ease with your own pace, comfortable with your own timing. That alignment didn't come from comparison, it came from listening. As thoughts of the coming year drift in, they don't need to stay. They can pass through lightly without settling. There's trust now that whatever needs attention will return on its own without being summoned. As this quiet stretch holds, there's often a sense that the year is now behind you in a different way. Not distant, not dismissed, just no longer leaning forward into the present. It rests where it belongs, complete without being summarized. I've noticed how in this space, the urge to explain fades and what remains is a simple awareness of having lived through it. This year may have taught you how to recognize when something has run its course. Not with finality, but with a gentle easing. The effort drops away, the questions soften. What once required attention no longer asks for it. That recognition doesn't come with certainty, it comes with relief. As mornings arrive now, there's often an ease in not reaching for meaning. The day doesn't need to offer insight to be worthwhile. It can begin quietly without expectation and still feel complete. There's something grounding in allowing that simplicity to be enough. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to meet moments as they were rather than as you hoped they'd be. That meeting wasn't always comfortable. Yet, over time, it built a steadiness that didn't rely on outcomes. You learned how to stay present without needing reassurance. There may have been times when you noticed your reactions arriving later than they used to. A pause before feeling, a space before responding. That pause wasn't hesitation. It was space that allowed choice where habit once lived. Over time, that space became familiar, even welcome. This year may also have changed how you experience quiet confidence. Not something declared or displayed, but something felt internally. A knowing that doesn't argue with itself. A sense of enoughness that doesn't need reinforcement. That kind of confidence settles quietly and stays. As the year nears its end, there's often less interest in measuring progress. Growth doesn't need to be proven. It's felt in the way certain things no longer pull at you, in the way your attention rests more easily, in the way you move through moments with less resistance. You may have noticed that some emotions no longer linger the way they once did. They pass through, acknowledged without being held onto. That doesn't mean they mattered less. It means you learned how to let them complete their movement. In these mornings, there's a calm in knowing you don't need to carry the year forward with you. What's meant to stay will. What isn't will continue to fall away on its own. There's trust in that process now built from experience rather than belief. Looking back, you might see how much of this year was about learning to stay with yourself, not improving, not fixing, just staying. That presence didn't require effort. It required honesty. And honesty, once practiced, becomes steady. As attention briefly touches the coming year, it does so without pressure. The future doesn't need to be welcomed or prepared for yet. It can wait. This moment has its own integrity, its own quiet completeness. For now, the day continues to open gently, breath steady, light arriving. Nothing to resolve, nothing to announce. Just the simple awareness of being here with the year resting behind you and the next one still undefined. As this quiet presence continues, there's often a sense that the year has already said what it needed to say, not in words, but in weight, in texture, in the way certain experiences still register in the body, even when the details have faded. I've noticed how at this point, memory feels less like recall and more like atmosphere. This year may have taught you that you don't need to hold on to everything to honor it. Some things are remembered best when they're allowed to soften, when they're carried as understanding rather than detail. That kind of remembering doesn't ask for effort. It happens naturally when enough time has passed for meaning to settle. As mornings arrive now, there's often a subtle gratitude for continuity. The simple fact that the day begins again, that light returns, that breath continues, these aren't things that need acknowledgement to matter. They ground you quietly, reminding you that life moves forward even when nothing is decided. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to trust your own pacing, not to speed up when things felt slow, not to force clarity when uncertainty lingered. That trust didn't come from confidence. It came from noticing that rushing rarely helped and waiting often did. There may have been moments when you felt yourself stepping out of old patterns without making it a milestone, responding differently, choosing rest where you once chose effort, allowing silence where you once filled space. Those changes didn't need to be marked. They integrated quietly, reshaping daily life from within. This year may also have refined how you listen, not just to others, but to what arises internally. Subtle signals, shifts in energy, a sense of ease or resistance that didn't require explanation to be trusted. Listening like that doesn't ask for interpretation, it asks for presence. As the year edges closer to its close, the idea of completion feels less important than the sense of arrival. You're here now with a fuller understanding of how you move through time. That understanding didn't come from reflection alone. It came from living, from being shaped by experience without needing to name it. You may have noticed that certain desires changed this year, not disappeared, just reoriented, less toward accumulation, more toward steadiness, less toward intensity, more toward depth. That shift often happens quietly when enough experience has shown what sustains and what exhausts. In these mornings, there's often a calm acceptance that not everything needs to be carried forward. Some things belong to the year that's ending. They can remain there complete in their own way. Letting them stay doesn't diminish their importance. It honors their timing. Looking back, you might recognize how often you chose to stay present rather than escape. Even when presence was uncomfortable, even when distraction was available, that choice didn't always feel deliberate. It became instinctive over time, shaping how you experience both ease and difficulty. As attention gently brushes against the coming year, it doesn't linger. There's no rush to imagine or plan. The future doesn't need rehearsal. It will meet you when it arrives, just as this year did. And you've already learned that you can meet it without needing to be ready in advance. As the stillness holds a little longer, there's often a quiet realization that nothing is unfinished in the way it once felt. Not because every question was answered, but because the need for answers softened. The year doesn't require your attention anymore. It no longer leans into you. It simply rests settled in its own shape. This year may have taught you that completion isn't a moment. It's a feeling, a sense that something has integrated enough to stop asking for energy. You didn't have to close it. It closed itself when you stopped circling it. As mornings arrive now, there's an ease in letting the day begin without interpretation. No meaning assigned, no purpose extracted, just the simple unfolding of light, breath, and awareness. That simplicity feels earned, as though experience itself cleared the way for it. Looking back, you might see how often you trusted what felt steady rather than what felt exciting. That choice doesn't create stories, it creates stability. And stability over time becomes a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need reinforcement. There may have been moments when you noticed how little explanation you needed from life this year. Things didn't always make sense, yet they didn't feel threatening. You learned how to live alongside ambiguity without trying to resolve it. That ability didn't come from strength, it came from familiarity. This year may also have softened how you think about progress, less linear, less visible, more internal. You didn't move forward in obvious ways, yet something shifted underneath: the way you respond, the way you pause, the way you trust your own timing. As the year nears its final days, memory feels less active. It doesn't pull you backward. It simply exists as part of the background, informing without interrupting. That's often how experience settles when it's been fully lived. You may have noticed that certain expectations quietly dissolved this year, not replaced, just released. And in their absence, there was space to notice what actually works, what feels natural, what doesn't require effort to maintain. In these mornings, there's often a calm acceptance that you don't need to prepare yourself for what comes next. Preparation has already happened through living, through responding when needed and resting when possible. There's trust in that now. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year was about staying rather than changing. Staying with discomfort until it softened. Staying with uncertainty until it lost its edge. Staying with yourself long enough to feel at home there. As this quiet attention stays with you, there's often a sense that even time itself has slowed to listen. Not stopped, just softened. The sharp edges of urgency round off, leaving something more humane in their place. I've noticed how, in moments like this, the day doesn't feel like a sequence to get through. It feels like a space to inhabit. This year may have shown you that you don't need to resolve every thought before moving on. Some thoughts lose their weight simply by being allowed to exist without engagement. They pass through lighter than before, no longer asking to be followed or fixed. That kind of ease doesn't come from effort. It comes from familiarity with your own inner weather. As mornings arrive now, there's often a quiet sense of consent. Consent to begin slowly. Consent to let the day show you what it needs rather than deciding in advance. That consent isn't passive. It's a choice to trust the unfolding instead of managing it. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to choose gentleness with yourself, with others, with the pace of things. Gentleness doesn't always look like kindness in the moment. Sometimes it looks like restraint, like stepping away, like letting something remain unresolved because forcing it would cost more than it gives. There may have been moments when you notice how your attention changed. What once pulled you in no longer did. What once felt distant now felt familiar. Attention has a way of revealing what truly matters without explanation. It simply stays where it feels at home. This year may also have deepened your comfort with the present moment. Not as a concept, but as a lived experience. You learned how to be here without needing to escape forward or backward. That ability didn't arrive suddenly. It developed quietly through repeated moments of staying when leaving would have been easier. As the year edges closer to its end, there's often less interest in defining what it was. Labels feel unnecessary. It was what it was. It asked what it asked. And you responded in the ways you could at the time. That's enough. Nothing more is required. You may have noticed that certain feelings no longer demand interpretation. They arise, are felt, and then move on. That movement doesn't erase them. It completes them. There's a difference you may have sensed between emotions that linger because they're avoided and those that pass because they're allowed. In these mornings, there's often a quiet appreciation for neutrality. Not happiness, not sadness, just steadiness. A sense that nothing is wrong in this moment. That neutrality doesn't lack depth. It holds a calm richness that doesn't need intensity to feel real. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year was about learning when to stop trying. Not giving up, just stopping unnecessary effort. letting some things resolve themselves without your involvement. That discernment grows slowly through noticing what happens when you step back. As thoughts of the coming year drift through, they don't stay long. There's no urgency to welcome them or push them away. They can pass like weather, leaving the sky unchanged. The future doesn't need to be shaped yet to feel approachable. For now, this moment continues to hold. Quiet, open, unpressured. There's no need to move it forward or mark it as anything special. Being here is already complete in its own way. As this calm attention remains, there's often a feeling that even the idea of transition has softened. The year isn't handing anything off dramatically. It's simply easing out of focus the way a sound fades when it's no longer being listened to directly. What stays isn't loud, it's steady. This year may have taught you that you don't need momentum to move forward. Sometimes forward motion happens quietly, almost invisibly, through a shift in how you relate to what's already here. You may have noticed that when pressure eased, clarity didn't disappear. It reorganized itself. As mornings arrive now, there's often a subtle pleasure in not being needed immediately. The world can wait a moment. Breath can settle. Awareness can widen. That pause doesn't delay anything important. It often makes what follows feel more honest. Looking back, you might see how often this year asked you to let things be incomplete. Conversations left open, decisions left flexible, feelings left unnamed. That incompleteness didn't weaken your life. It made it more spacious, less confined by definitions that no longer fit. There may have been moments when you realized that you didn't need certainty to feel safe. Familiarity with uncertainty itself became a kind of ground. You learned how to stand without needing to know what comes next. That learning didn't arrive as insight, it arrived as experience. This year may also have softened how you measure your days. Less emphasis on productivity, more awareness of tone. How a day felt mattered more than what it produced. That shift changes how time is remembered. It leaves fewer sharp edges. As the year continues to settle behind you, memory feels less like a record and more like a presence. It doesn't interrupt. It informs, quietly shaping how you notice things now. That's often how experience integrates when it's been fully lived. You may have noticed that your inner pace feels more consistent, not rushed on good days, not stalled on difficult ones. Just steady enough to carry you through without needing adjustment. That steadiness doesn't draw attention to itself. It simply holds. In these mornings, there's often a quiet appreciation for not needing to arrive anywhere else. This moment doesn't feel like a threshold yet. It feels like a resting place, a place where nothing is expected and nothing is missing. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year involved learning to trust what unfolds without commentary, letting life move without narrating it. That silence didn't take meaning away, it allowed meaning to settle on its own. As attention occasionally touches the coming year, it does so without urgency or imagination. There's no pressure to picture it. It can remain unformed, waiting until it naturally comes into focus. That waiting doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels neutral, even kind. For now, the quiet continues. Breath even, awareness open, the year resting fully where it belongs, no longer asking for review or interpretation. As this quiet awareness lingers, there's often a sense that even reflection has grown tired of speaking, not from exhaustion, but from completion. The year doesn't ask to be revisited anymore. It has settled into you in ways that don't require attention to remain real. What mattered found its place. What didn't loosened without resistance. This year may have shown you that steadiness can exist without certainty. You didn't need to know where things were heading to feel grounded. You learned how to stand in the middle of not knowing without collapsing into urgency. That ability didn't arrive through effort. It came from repetition, from discovering that uncertainty doesn't undo you. As mornings arrive now, there's often a softness in how the body meets the day. No bracing, no anticipation of difficulty, just a gentle readiness to be present. That readiness isn't optimism, it's familiarity with yourself and with the rhythm of time as it actually moves. Looking back, you might see how often you allowed yourself to stop explaining this year, to others, to yourself. The need to justify softened. Choices didn't require narratives anymore. They simply made sense in the moment they were made. That simplicity carries a quiet relief. There may have been moments when you noticed how little resistance you felt toward what was happening, not because everything was comfortable, but because you stopped arguing with reality. That shift doesn't remove challenge, it removes unnecessary friction. And over time, that friction had been costing more than you realized. This year may also have deepened your trust in what unfolds slowly. Not everything arrived on time, not everything arrived at all. And still, life continued to feel workable. You learn how to let timing be what it was without taking it personally. As the year continues to rest behind you, memory no longer asks to be sorted. It simply exists as part of your internal landscape, informing without interrupting. That's often how experience completes itself quietly without asking to be named. You may have noticed that your attention feels less scattered now, not because there's less to notice, but because you're less pulled by what doesn't matter. Attention naturally settles where it feels grounded. That settling isn't forced, it happens when discernment has had time to grow. In these mornings, there's often an appreciation for the absence of urgency. Nothing pressing, nothing demanding definition, just the simple continuity of being here. That absence doesn't feel empty. It feels supportive, as though the moment itself is holding you. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year involved learning when to stop pushing, when effort crossed into strain, when persistence stopped serving. Learning to stop isn't weakness, it's attentiveness to what actually sustains you. As thoughts of the coming year drift by, they do so lightly, without anchoring. There's no rush to welcome them, no need to shape them yet. The future doesn't require engagement in this space. It can wait its turn. As this calm space continues to hold, there's often a sense that even language begins to slow. Words don't rush forward anymore. They arrive one at a time, if they arrive at all. The year feels less like something to describe and more like something that has already been absorbed quietly beneath the surface of thought. This year may have shown you that living doesn't always leave clear markers. No obvious milestones, no neat transitions, and still something unmistakable shifted. Not outwardly, but in how you carry yourself through ordinary moments, the way you pause, the way you listen, the way you no longer rush to fill silence. As mornings arrive now, there's a gentle familiarity in waking without needing orientation. You don't have to ask where you are emotionally. You already know. The body tells you, the breath tells you. There's a quiet steadiness in that knowing that doesn't require explanation. Looking back, you might notice how much less you needed reassurance this year, not because life became easier, but because you became more anchored in your own experience. External validation lost some of its pull. You learned how to trust what you sensed internally, even when no one else confirmed it. There may have been moments when you realized that clarity didn't come from thinking harder, it came from stopping, from allowing enough space for things to settle on their own. That kind of clarity feels different. It doesn't excite, it steadies. This year may also have softened your relationship with waiting. Waiting no longer felt like an interruption. It felt like part of the rhythm. You learned how to be present even when nothing was moving. That ability changes how time is experienced. It makes space feel livable rather than empty. As the year now rests fully behind you, there's little impulse to reach back. Not out of avoidance, but because there's nothing left pulling. What needed attention received it. What didn't released itself. That release didn't require effort. It happened when holding on stopped making sense. You may have noticed that your inner world feels quieter now. Not silent, just less crowded. Thoughts pass through without gathering. Feelings arise without demanding interpretation. That quiet isn't something you created. It emerged when enough noise fell away on its own. In these mornings, there's often a subtle sense of sufficiency. Nothing missing, nothing excessive, just enough. That feeling doesn't need to last to matter. Even brief moments of it leave an impression that stays. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year involved learning to remain where you were, not seeking escape, not demanding change, just staying long enough for things to soften. That staying required patience, even when you didn't call it that at the time. As attention occasionally brushes against what comes next, it does so without weight. The future doesn't feel distant or close, it simply hasn't arrived yet. And that's acceptable. There's trust now that when it does arrive, you'll meet it as you always have, present, attentive, and grounded. As this quiet presence remains, there's often a sense that even anticipation has softened. Nothing is leaning forward anymore, nothing is pulling you ahead. The year has settled fully into the background, not forgotten, just no longer asking to be carried. This year may have shown you that ease doesn't arrive through effort, it arrives when effort is no longer necessary. When you stop trying to extract meaning and allow meaning to surface on its own, that kind of ease feels subtle at first, then unmistakable. As mornings arrive now, there's a familiarity in the stillness. Not boredom, not emptiness, just recognition. You've been here before in moments like this when nothing needed to happen for the moment to feel complete. That recognition brings a quiet steadiness that doesn't depend on circumstances. Looking back, you might see how much of this year involved learning to trust what didn't speak loudly, intuition, timing, the gentle sense of yes or no that didn't require explanation. Listening to those signals wasn't dramatic, it was consistent, and consistency has a way of reshaping life without announcement. There may have been moments when you noticed how little urgency remained around certain decisions. They could wait, or they resolved themselves without intervention. That shift didn't come from certainty. It came from understanding that not everything requires immediate response to remain intact. This year may also have softened how you experience endings. They no longer feel abrupt or final. They feel like transitions that don't need to be marked. Something finishes and something else continues without needing a line between them. As the days move quietly toward their close memory no longer stirs much, it rests. And in its resting, it offers something gentler than recollection, a sense of having lived fully enough to let go. You may have noticed that your inner pace feels settled now, not slowed artificially, just natural. Breath aligns with thought. Thought aligns with awareness. There's no need to hurry any of it along. In these mornings, there's often a calm acceptance that this moment doesn't lead anywhere else. It stands on its own, complete, undemanding. That acceptance doesn't diminish what comes next. It simply honors what is here now. Looking back, you might recognize how much of this year was about learning when to stop asking questions. Not because answers were found, but because the questions lost their urgency. Silence became a sufficient response. As attention lightly touches the idea of the coming year, it does so without pressure, it doesn't linger, it doesn't imagine, it simply acknowledges that time continues, and that's enough information for now. There's often a moment when even noticing becomes unnecessary, when attention no longer needs direction, when being here feels complete without effort. This is one of those moments. The year no longer feels near or far. It simply rests. It doesn't need to be revisited. It doesn't need to be carried forward. What mattered has already settled where it belongs. Breath feels even now. Not deeper, not lighter, just steady. The kind of steadiness that doesn't ask for awareness to sustain it. Nothing is being asked of you in this space. No reflection, no readiness, no intention. The day will continue when it does. Time will move on its own. For now, there's no need to reach for anything else. This moment can remain exactly as it is, and that is enough.